Under the surface of your smile, there's a quiet collapse. You keep showing up, talking to people, doing what you need to do, but deep inside, it's dark. Not the kind of darkness that makes you afraid of the outside world, but the kind that makes you question if your heart is still working. You try to pray, and the words fall flat. You open the Bible, and it feels like just another book. You sing in church, but the echo feels hollow. And worst of all, you wonder if anyone around you can even see it. They don't, because this is a darkness that disguises itself with silence. And that kind of darkness is the heaviest of all. You didn't ask for this. You didn't choose to feel numb. And yet, here you are, lost in a season you can't name, feeling more like a shadow than a soul. People say, God is with you, but you don't feel Him. They say, have faith, but you've already spent every ounce of it just trying to get out of bed. You're not faithless, you're just tired. The kind of tired that goes beyond sleep. The kind of tired that makes you question your own worth, your place in this life. And if this is all there is, there's something sacred about that place. Not because it feels good, but because it strips you of everything fake. You don't have the strength to perform. You don't have the energy to pretend. You don't have the will to impress anyone. And it's there, in that hollow space, that the real questions start. Not the polished ones we ask at Bible studies, but the raw ones we cry into our pillows. Where are you, God? Did you forget about me? Am I broken beyond repair? Why did you let me fall so deep into this? Or worse, why did you go silent when I needed you the most? That's where Psalm 18:28 breaks through like a crack of light in a windowless room. You, Lord, keep my lamp burning. My God turns my darkness into light. This verse doesn't speak to people who are already in the light. It's not for the confident, the cheerful, the strong. It's for the one who's sitting in a car, parked in a grocery store lot, crying without knowing why. It's for the woman who smiled at church, but cried in the bathroom between services. It's for the man who's asking God why he even wakes up anymore. Because this isn't about having faith in theory. This is about when you're barely holding on in practice. And what David is saying in this verse is something deeply radical. God doesn't wait for you to get it together. He doesn't demand that you claw your way out of the dark with willpower. He comes into the darkness, and He does something no therapist, friend, or even pastor can do. He turns the darkness itself into light, not removes it, transforms it. Think about that. He doesn't just bring a flashlight. He rewires what felt like death into something that becomes a source of revelation. That room where you collapsed, that could become your sanctuary. That moment where you stopped praying, that might be the silence He's using to speak in a deeper way. Sometimes, the absence of light isn't a sign that God left. It's the stage He chooses for rebirth. There's a reason so many of the most powerful moments in Scripture happened in the dark. Creation began in darkness before God said, "Let there be light." Jacob wrestled with God through the night. Jonah met God in the belly of the whale. Paul was blinded before his eyes were truly opened. And Jesus, He rose while it was still dark. Why does God work like this? Because He knows what we forget. When we can't see anything around us, we start to feel everything within us. In the dark, distractions disappear. In the dark, our masks fall off. In the dark, we become aware of how desperately we need Him. Not the idea of Him, but the living, breathing presence of a Savior who is not afraid to enter the parts of us we're afraid to show anyone else. You're not less spiritual because you're in a dark season. You're not weak because you're struggling to feel anything. You're not a failure because your faith feels thin. What you're experiencing is not a punishment. It's a passage. And if you try to escape it too soon, you'll miss what God is trying to build inside you. There are things you can only receive in the dark. You learn to walk by trust, not by sight. You learn to hear whispers instead of chasing thunder. You learn that even when your heart is cracked open, God doesn't waste the pain. He reshapes it into something sacred. Some people never understand this because they spend their lives avoiding discomfort. But the ones who grow deep roots are those who don't run from the dark. They stay, they sit, they wait, and they watch. And one day, they realize that while everything else around them was quiet, God had been doing surgery in their soul. So maybe you're not broken. Maybe you're being hollowed out to carry something heavier. Maybe you're not lost. Maybe you're being hidden so God can prepare you away from the noise. Maybe you're not falling apart. Maybe you're being undone so the real version of you can emerge. One that isn't afraid of silence anymore, because now you know what to do with it. Let the darkness do its work. Let God move in the space you can't control. You don't have to feel strong. You don't have to feel anything at all. Just don't run. Don't give up. Even if your voice is shaking, even if your hands are trembling, even if all you can do is whisper, "Help." He hears that, and he responds. Because the same God who said, "Let there be light," is still speaking. And when he speaks, darkness doesn't argue. It disappears. It's strange how darkness sharpens our ears. When the noise of the world is stripped away, when your usual coping mechanisms stop working, when even your own voice sounds foreign to you, a new kind of silence begins to settle in. At first, it feels unbearable. But over time, if you let yourself stay in that space just long enough, you begin to notice something unsettling and beautiful at the same time. Your soul starts to speak louder than your mind ever did. The pain that you've been trying to pray away starts asking questions you didn't want to answer. Why do you think your value depends on being needed by others? Why are you more afraid of stillness than of exhaustion? Why do you think love has to be earned with performance? The silence isn't empty. It's filled with the voice of truth, waiting to be heard. And the longer you sit with it, the more it unmasks the lies you've called your identity. You see, the darkness isn't just a place you find yourself in. It becomes a mirror. It doesn't lie, but it doesn't flatter either. It shows you where your worth has been misplaced. It shows you which people you clung to when God was trying to pull you deeper. It shows you how often you depended on validation instead of presence. But it also shows you something more important than all of that. It shows you what still remains when everything else has fallen apart. Because it's one thing to have peace when your prayers are being answered. It's another to have peace when heaven is silent. That kind of peace, uncertain, trembling, yet strangely resilient, is not a personality trait. It's a spiritual weapon. It's forged in the nights where your tears become your prayers and your surrender becomes your strength. You don't get that peace in a classroom. You earn it in the trenches. That's why David didn't say God gave him light. He said God turned his darkness into light. The very thing that once terrified him became the place where God revealed himself. There's a divine reversal at play here, and it defies logic. The pit doesn't become your prison. It becomes your platform. The struggle doesn't end your faith. It deepens it. And the night doesn't mark your abandonment. It marks your encounter. Take Elijah, for example. After calling down fire from heaven and defeating the prophets of Baal, he finds himself in a cave, asking God to let him die. It makes no sense unless you understand what spiritual burnout looks like. Elijah wasn't faithless. He was empty. And when God shows up, he doesn't scold Elijah. He doesn't lecture him. He whispers. Because sometimes the loudest love speaks in the softest voice. Sometimes God knows what thunder can't fix. A whisper can heal. Your journey might not look like Elijah's, but the cave is familiar, isn't it? That space where you don't even have the energy to argue with God anymore, where your prayers are more like sighs, and your hope feels like it's hanging on by a thread. But what if that cave isn't where your story ends? What if it's where your vision begins to shift? In the darkness, you start seeing not with your eyes, but with your spirit. You begin to recognize the difference between what the world calls strength and what God calls surrender. You realize that joy isn't about happiness, it's about presence. And faith isn't about feeling, it's about holding on when you have every reason to let go. That's where transformation begins. Not when your circumstances change, but when your understanding of God changes. When you stop looking for Him to rescue you out of the fire, and you start seeing that He's the one in the fire with you, like He was with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, not pulling them out, but joining them inside it. That fourth man in the fire? That's who he is, a God who refuses to stay at a distance while you burn. So when you're sitting in your room wondering why everything feels numb, don't assume you're alone. Don't think your silence has scared him off. Sometimes God's greatest work is done in whisper, not in shouts. And sometimes the most sacred thing he can do is not to fix your life, but to sit with you in it. Because what happens in the dark becomes sacred when you stop trying to escape it and start allowing God to illuminate it, not erase it, not bypass it, illuminate it. He doesn't want to take away your memories or rewrite your past. He wants to heal the parts of you that believed you had to carry everything alone. This is where new language forms. You stop saying, "Why me?" and you begin asking, "What are you forming in me?" You stop praying for escape and start asking for endurance. You stop measuring your worth by your productivity and start recognizing your value in your breath. Because sometimes just breathing is an act of defiance, and just waking up is a victory. What's profound about God is that he often does his most powerful work when nobody else is watching. The miracle of resurrection didn't happen in front of a crowd. It happened in a sealed tomb. No witnesses, no applause, just silence, and then life. So maybe that's what he's doing in you, not making a scene, but making something sacred. Your weakness is not a liability. It's a doorway. It's the exact place where grace begins. And grace is never loud. It's never aggressive. It shows up like a gentle light, just bright enough to remind you that you're still here, still breathing, still becoming. You're not forgotten. You're being reshaped. And sometimes the reshaping hurts. But what comes out of it is something unshakable. Not the version of you that always smiles, but the version of you that knows how to sit with others in their pain because you've sat with your own. The version of you that no longer runs from hard questions because you've made peace with not having all the answers. The version of you that glows, not from perfection, but from the flicker of a soul that's walked through fire and didn't lose its light. And that's the beginning of something beautiful. Some of the most defining moments of your life will not be seen, celebrated, or even understood by others. They will happen quietly, in the small hours of the morning when you can't sleep because your mind won't stop racing. They'll happen when you open your Bible and the words don't speak like they used to, when prayer feels like talking into the air and your faith feels more like a question than an answer. It's in these moments that your soul begins to strip away every illusion it once leaned on. You realize that much of your faith wasn't built on truth. It was built on familiarity. You weren't trusting God. You were trusting a version of Him that only made sense when everything in your life felt manageable. But the real God doesn't exist to make your life manageable. He exists to make your soul unshakable. This is where the journey gets raw, because spiritual maturity doesn't look like always feeling close to God. Sometimes it looks like walking with Him even when you feel a million miles away. Think of Job, not the man with everything, but the man who lost everything. He tore his clothes, he scraped his skin, he wept, he screamed, but he didn't let go. He didn't pretend everything was okay. He didn't say all the right religious words. He stayed in the tension, and in that space, he discovered something most of us miss. God doesn't need your performance. He wants your presence, even when it's broken, especially when it's broken. So many people think they're failing spiritually because they don't feel inspired. They believe the lack of emotion means the absence of God. But that's not how presence works. You don't feel your lungs filling with air every second, but they're still sustaining your life. You don't feel your heart beating, but it keeps you alive. And sometimes, God is doing the most faithful work when you feel the least spiritual. It's here that we encounter the power of divine paradox. That you can be full of doubt and still full of faith. That you can be crying and still be courageous. That you can be in the middle of chaos and still be exactly where God wants you to be. This is where God begins to shift your entire framework of what strength looks like. Strength isn't never falling. It's getting up slowly, with trembling hands, knowing that the ground you're rising from has now become holy. Not because it's clean, but because God met you there. Let me ask you something you may have never heard before. What if the place of your deepest breakdown is also the place of your divine breakthrough? What if the floor you collapsed on in tears becomes the foundation of a new version of you, wiser, softer, braver? When Jesus met the woman at the well, he didn't wait for her to clean up her story. He didn't wait for her to solve her identity crisis or fix her behavior. He met her right in the middle of her mess. That well wasn't a coincidence. It was a sacred setup. Because God doesn't avoid broken places. He enters them on purpose, and that includes you. Your pain isn't proof that something went wrong. Sometimes it's evidence that something sacred is being born. Think about the process of refining gold. It requires fire, extreme, uncomfortable heat. But that fire doesn't destroy the gold. It purifies it. It brings the impurities to the surface so they can be removed. The gold that comes out on the other side is more valuable, not because it avoided the fire, but because it survived it. That's you. There are parts of your life right now that feel like they're burning. Relationships you thought were stable are now strained. Dreams you were sure would come to life are fading. Your body is tired. Your spirit is thin. But underneath all of that, God is doing something that doesn't require your understanding, only your surrender. You don't have to know what He's doing. You just have to stay with Him while He does it. And this is where trust is redefined. Trust isn't saying, God, I'm okay with whatever happens. That's resignation, not faith. Trust is saying, God, even if I don't understand what you're doing, I know you're still good. It's holding on to His character when His actions confuse you. It's remembering what He whispered in the light when everything around you has gone dark. This kind of trust changes the way you walk through life. It doesn't mean you stop hurting. It means your hurt no longer defines you. It no longer dictates your identity. You're not just a person who went through loss. You're someone who carries light through it. You're not just someone who was betrayed. You're someone who discovered that your worth is not in how others treat you, but in how God sees you. And how does He see you? As chosen, as loved, as worthy, not because of what you've done, but because of who He is. That truth begins to carve a new rhythm in your soul. You start waking up not just to survive the day, but to sense the sacred in it. You stop asking for signs that things will get easier and start noticing the strength that's being built in you even while it's still hard. You begin to see that maybe this isn't punishment, it's preparation. Maybe this isn't the end, it's construction. And little by little, the fear begins to lift. You no longer panic when things fall apart, because you've been through collapse before, and you learned that God doesn't walk away from ruins, He rebuilds from them. You begin to realize that what looked like a delay was actually design, that what felt like failure was really foundation, that what broke you wasn't meant to destroy you, it was meant to open you. And in that opening, God is planting something that couldn't have grown any other way. There is no shortcut to becoming who you were born to be, but there is a promise. You will not become it alone. And that promise is enough to carry you forward. There's a strange kind of silence that follows a long season of suffering. It's not peace exactly, but it's not chaos either. It's more like the numbness after a storm. The moment when the noise stops, but your hands still tremble. Your heart still beats like it's bracing for the next blow. That's where many people get stuck. Not in the tragedy itself, but in the confusion that follows. In the question, what now? And it's a holy question, because it means something in you survived. When you reach the edge of yourself, when every plan collapses, when every escape fails, there's only one place left to fall, into the arms of the one who never needed your strength in the first place. This is not where you lose your identity. It's where you meet it. Not the version of you shaped by performance, perfection, or other people's expectations, but the you that God knit together in the quiet before anyone else had an opinion. This is the part of the process that most people avoid, the part where you're not rebuilding yet, You're just learning how to breathe again, how to exist without proving anything, how to sit with the stillness and let it speak. Because stillness does speak, and sometimes it says things that movement never could. You begin to notice the small things, how the light changes in the room when you open the curtain, how the sound of your own breathing can be a reminder that life is still inside you. These are not trivial observations. They're signs of presence. They're the fingerprints of a God who isn't just waiting for you to get back on your feet. He's with you while you're still on your knees. There's a moment in Exodus 33 when Moses, after leading a rebellious, exhausted people, tells God, "If your presence does not go with us, do not bring us up from here." That was a man who had seen miracles. He had seen seas part, enemies fall, manna fall from the sky. But at that moment, he wasn't asking for success. He was asking for presence. Because even miracles don't mean anything if you're walking through them alone. That is the shift. You stop asking God to fix things and start asking Him to stay with you through them. This is the sacred slowness of transformation, the inner shift that can't be rushed. You're not becoming stronger in the way the world measures strength. You're becoming deeper, more aware, more available to what's real. And what's real is often very quiet. When you were younger in your faith, you may have thought that power looked like never doubting, like speaking with boldness, like commanding every storm to be still. But as your soul matures, you start to see that power is also the ability to sit in the storm and say, "Even if it doesn't stop, I will not leave you." That is worship. That is trust. That is love that has been tested and proven true. Have you noticed that some of the most powerful psalms don't end in resolution? They end in trust. David says, "Why, my soul, are you downcast?" And there's no sudden breakthrough, just a decision. I will yet praise Him. That's what maturity looks like. Not always feeling it, but choosing it. Sometimes the greatest act of faith is simply not giving up, not walking away, not silencing your prayers just because they weren't answered the way you hoped. Because even unanswered prayers shape us. They teach us that God is not a vending machine. He's a Father. And fathers don't always give you what you want. They give you what you need. And sometimes what you need is the silence itself. Because silence invites you into surrender, into listening, into discovering that God's voice isn't always loud. It's often a whisper. Elijah didn't find God in the fire or the earthquake. He found Him in the gentle breeze. And that's what makes this season so sacred. It's the place where you learn how to hear again, how to recognize God, not by sight, but by presence, not by outcome, but by intimacy. You begin to let go of needing clarity in order to move. You begin to walk by faith again, not the naive kind of faith that says, everything will be easy, but the kind of faith that says, even if it's not, I'm not going back to who I was before, because something is happening here, even if I can't see it yet. Think of the seed underground. It looks like nothing is happening, but the shell is breaking. Roots are forming, and the most important growth is taking place where no one can see it. That's you. You're not behind. You're being planted. And there is a difference. This is the part of the story where God isn't changing your situation. He's changing you, not to punish you, but to prepare you. Because what's coming requires a depth in you that surface faith cannot hold. So don't rush through this. Don't despise it. Let it work through you. Let the quiet shape you. Let the uncertainty stretch you. Because the person who emerges from this season will not be the same. They'll be more grounded, more honest, more real. And one day, maybe not today, you'll look back and see that this wasn't a detour. It was a deepening. You'll realize that the silence you hated became the sanctuary where God reintroduced you to yourself. And that changes everything. There will come a moment, perhaps quietly, perhaps suddenly, when the weight on your chest begins to lift. Not because everything around you has changed, but because something within you has. You'll look around and realize that you're not in the same place you were. Yes, the circumstances might still look dark, but your eyes, they see differently now. That's the power of sacred darkness. It doesn't just pass. it transforms you, and it never leaves you the same. The verse from Psalm 18:28 whispers like a gentle revelation, "You, Lord, keep my lamp burning. My God turns my darkness into light." This is not the kind of light that flicks on like a switch. This is the slow, sacred kind. The kind that grows in the soul like fire in the bones, quiet, persistent, unshakable. What God gives you in the dark doesn't vanish in the light. It becomes part of you. You learn that light isn't always loud. Sometimes it glows. Sometimes it flickers. Sometimes it's just enough for the next step, and no more. But that's all you need. Because the light God gives isn't meant to illuminate the entire road. It's meant to lead you, moment by moment, closer to Him. And that intimacy changes how you walk. It teaches you to stay close, not to run ahead, not to demand answers, just to trust. Remember when the Israelites walked through the wilderness? God didn't give them a 5-year plan. He gave them daily manna, just enough, and they hated it. They wanted something more predictable, more manageable. But God wasn't trying to meet their preferences. He was building their dependence. And now you know what that feels like. That holy tension between wanting to control everything and learning how to lean into what you can't control at all. That's not failure. That's spiritual maturity. Because strength isn't always standing tall. Sometimes strength is lying in bed, whispering a prayer you're not sure you believe, but choosing to say it anyway. Sometimes strength is crying in the shower and still going to work. Sometimes strength is showing up when all you want is to disappear, and God sees that. He honors that. We often think God is looking for heroes, but really, He's looking for the willing, the honest, the ones who say, "I don't have much left, but you can have what I've got." That's the kind of surrender that moves heaven. And don't underestimate what's happening in your spirit right now. You might feel tired, but tired doesn't mean defeated. Tired means you've been fighting. It means you've endured. And even when your knees hit the floor, that's not weakness, that's worship. Because the floor is where revival starts. It's where broken people lift their eyes and remember that ashes were never the end of the story. Beauty comes from ashes. Oil comes from crushing. Wine comes from pressing. And glory comes from surrender. There's a strange strength rising in you now. Not loud, not proud, but fierce. The kind of strength that carries peace into chaos. The kind that walks into rooms full of pain and doesn't flinch. Because you've been there, and you know what it costs. And you've discovered something the enemy hoped you never would, that God does His best work with broken things. We live in a world that teaches us to hide our scars, but God uses them. He doesn't cover them, He redeems them. Because scars are proof you made it through. And more than that, they are doors of empathy. Your pain becomes someone else's lifeline. You will meet people, whether you expect to or not, who are standing where you stood. And you'll have words that only the wounded carry. You'll have eyes that can see pain no one else notices. And you'll have authority, not because of a title, but because you bled and survived. That's why the enemy tried to silence you. Not just to destroy you, but to prevent your story from saving someone else. But he failed. You're still here, and that means God's not done. So breathe. Not because everything is perfect, but because this moment matters, because your survival is sacred, because your story has weight, and because the night you thought would end you became the altar that changed you. This isn't a cliché ending. This is resurrection. And not just the kind you read about on Easter Sunday, but the kind that happens quietly, daily, inside of you, when faith returns, when hope flickers back to life, when you choose to trust, even if your hands still shake. That is the beginning of a new chapter, not because you feel ready, but because God says you are. You don't have to understand everything. You don't have to fix everything. You just have to keep walking, keep breathing, keep surrendering, because you're not walking alone. The same God who sat with you in the silence, who wept with you in the confusion, who held you when the world didn't see you, is the God who now calls you forward, not to perform, not to impress, but to live fully, freely, authentically. You carry something now that you didn't before. A light that knows how to shine in dark places. A heart that knows how to love through pain. A spirit that knows where true strength comes from. So step forward. Not because the night is over, but because the light in you has finally begun to burn, and it will never go out again.